This podcast is about introducing our fans to the animals, plants, and other products that we work with at Josh's Frogs. It's an opportunity to paint a picture of our hobby that is refreshing. We want you guys to be successful with the animals that you're keeping, and we want our hobby to grow ethically and sustainably into the future. Hello and welcome to the Josh's Frogs podcast. Today I have Austin with me again. This is his third episode. He's going to talk about Hourglass tree frogs. Before we do that, I'm going to give a shout out to the podcast sponsor, which just so happens to be Josh's Frogs. So we're your one-stop shop for all your amphibian and reptile needs. Anything from animals, captive bred, to the food and feeders that they eat, to the supplies they need to take care of them. We carry it all in one location. So kind of unique in that regard. You can get a box of crickets with a light bulb and your crested gecko food all in one shipment. Save you some money that way. We also are really committed to educating people on how to properly care for those animals. So we do things like this podcast, videos, blogs, how-to articles. We're really committed to that. And then on the flip side of that, making our customer service team available if you have any issues all the time. So without further ado, Austin, welcome. And remind us again, what do you do here at Josh's Frogs? What's your job and what do you work with?
So I am the curator of tree frogs and toads, which I don't know if I mentioned the last time I was on. I feel like is not encompassing enough of the things that are in the department that I run, because we also have ground-dwelling frogs and the axolotls that we're currently working with. But yeah, I manage a small team of people, and we breed and produce all of these things for our happy customers, hopefully.
Cool. Give us the idea of kind of that range, like just list off some of the species that we're working with. And if you could put some numbers to that, like how many species are we working with? How many species do we breed on a yearly basis? If you can give us some frame of reference.
So I actually just got out of a meeting where I was talking with Anthony about this.
Good.
And I think we kind of just, off what we could name off the top of our heads, there were 21 species that we were actively able to breed.
Cool.
And I want to say that was a lower number than what is actually there. There's probably some that we're not thinking of.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of the neotropical things: red eyes, black eyes, lemurs, tiger legs, the Philomedusa bicolor. We have milk frogs, the Dendropsophis. There's the bird poop frogs. There's hourglass. There's triangle, clown, reticulata. There's the genus is huge. And anything else? It's, chocolate milk frogs, the coriaceous, those guys. And then there's some Asian species. We have the yellow-spotted climbing toads. We have some Theloderma, the big mossy frogs, the mini mossy frogs, the Vietnamese bird poop frogs, the Theloderma stellatum, and then there's other toads and things like that. There's a lot.
Cool. Cool. It's pretty broad, the amount of animals that you guys are working with. Mm-hmm. So I think like research and care is a trademark of some of the stuff that we do in other departments, but it becomes even more a necessity in your area because of the breadth of animals that you're working with. Because they're, in a lot of ways, they're all frogs, or they're all toads, or they're all tree frogs. But in a lot of ways, they're quite a bit different.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to actually producing them and breeding them as well too. So today we're going to talk about hourglass frogs. Explain what that is. What are hourglass frogs? What's the group? What's in captivity? What's not in captivity?
So hourglass tree frogs are a neotropical species. Usually the biggest ones that I've seen are probably the triangle tree frogs that we have. We have a really, really big female, and she's just under 2 inches.
Wow.
So not a very large species of frog. As far as hourglass, the Dendropsophis evercatus, that's their species. They are like around an inch as adults. Females are a little bit bulkier than males, and they are great little frogs. I believe, if the research is still accurate, they're the only species of frog that can lay their eggs both above water and in water.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. At least that was true. The the genus has been kind of like broken up into a lot of different species. Like clown tree frogs used to all just be Dendropsophis leucophyllatus, and that included all of like the reticulated giraffe pattern ones,
Yep.
and like all of these triangle, which are triangulum now. And then there's Arnty, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
that they broke up in this genus. So it's possible that back in the day, scientists were observing two different species doing two different things. That was just one little fun fact that I wanted to bring in
cool.
today.
Cool. Now, what are the hourglass frogs that we work with here at Josh's Frogs, and then what are the ones that are popular in the hobby? Like, what are people going to run into and say, "Oh yeah, that's an hourglass frog"?
So they are primarily going to be yellow and brown in that kind of combination. The clown tree frogs are a little bit more red on their bellies, but for the most part, the genus is yellow, except for the weird one, which is the South American bird poop frog. And then there's some other species that look similar to that. What was it? I think it was Dendropsophis melanogerius or something that we got in by accident with some like true bird poop frogs. And the only difference between those species is the bellies. The bird poop frogs have like this bright orangey yellow on their bellies, and the other species, which I think had the common name of the interior tree frog, they were just like white and black. And I don't think we ever really did anything with them because we didn't get a good sex ratio.
Yeah.
And so we kind of were just like, well, this is neat, but I don't think there's really a future with this when the South American bird poop frogs are so popular, and we want to prioritize space for them.
Yep.
But yeah, the yellow tree frogs are kind of one of the common names of the genus of the frogs. So the hourglass, a lot of them have some sort of pattern on their back. The hourglass proper, Ebricata, they have like a true hourglass pattern. And clown tree frogs, the leucophyllatus, those guys will always have kind of like a leaf pattern on their, like right at the bottom of their back, and then some whitish lines up the sides and up to their nose. Triangulum are also called the variable tree frog, and they have just a myriad of patterns. We bred some that had your typical triangle pattern on their back, and then our female has almost like a pirate hook shape to her back. Yeah, but you'll get frogs that look like they have jigsaw puzzle pieces on their backs, and they're really, really cool. And then we have some reticulata that currently have not bred for us, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to get some eggs out of them eventually, because we do have males and females. So they should breed similarly to the triangulum, but they have kind of like spotting patterns on down their sides. They're not quite that giraffe morph that can pop up in those different species. There's a really cool article that kind of goes over all of the different ways that you differentiate the species from each other, because they look so similar and can, especially the triangulum, because they will kind of like mimic other ones with all of like the weird patterns that show up on their backs. It's like, this looks exactly like a clown tree frog, but I know it isn't.
Now compare and contrast these with some of the more popular tree frogs that are in the hobby: red eyes, milks, whites. Like how are the hourglass frogs a little bit different in care? I know you mentioned size; they tend to be a little bit smaller.
Yes, so they don't need as much space as an adult milk frog or an adult red-eyed tree frog. So you can keep them like in a pair in probably a 10-gallon, and they'll be comfortable. But the 10-gallon would most likely look more like your 12-18 Exoterra or Zoomed or Zilla tanks. More space is always good, though. I believe the smallest tank that we utilize for them is an 18 cube.
Okay.
But you can go up to an 18-24. The really cool thing with basically the entire genus is they're small enough that you can house them with dart frogs.
Wow.
So that's an appealing thing to a lot of people, because they want to have the diversity. Whenever I'm kind of coaching people with the mixed tanks, I always try to encourage them to try to look at species that are, one, geographically similar. So they would be encountering potentially each other in the wild. The risk for like weird diseases popping up is really minimal with that. You want things that have basically different day-night cycles. So all of the Dendropsophis are nocturnal. Dart frogs are diurnal. They're not going to really bother each other because they're not going to be awake at the same time.
Yep.
And then food size is the other big one. These guys are eating quarter-inch crickets their whole lives, which may be a bit tricky for some dart frogs to get to, but Phyllobates can easily take quarter-inch crickets. And if you have to, you can allow them to eat fruit flies for at least a little bit.
Yep.
They're not usually as nutritious as the crickets can be because you can gut load them. But you can kind of feed them the same food around the same time, so you're not having to constantly add food to the tank and kind of potentially stress out your animals.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about the day-night cycle being different than darts.
Mm-hmm.
What about the spots of the tank that they're actually utilizing? Do they tend to be on the ground like the dart frogs tend to be and then can climb, or they tend to be more on the top? And
they're definitely, so our triangulum love bamboo.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some bamboo tubes in their tanks, and usually like if you pick that out of the tank, there's like 3 to 4 frogs inside one of the bamboo pieces. The hourglass in the exoterras really, really like hiding up in the space that's like right in the back in like the lid. It's not where the sliding things are to like put cords and things in the back, but like right up in the middle, there's this open space that they just will wedge themselves into. And usually there's like 3 up in there too. So when I'm training new people on that species, I always say, always check in there before you start like spraying chemicals to clean the tank, because there may be a frog up in there.
Yeah. Now, talk a little bit about, like you talked about us feeding crickets to them. Are we feeding anything else? And then how do you determine what size crickets you're gonna feed these? And like juveniles, that freshly hatched babies. How big of crickets are they eating? Talk about the cricket sizing and
so first off, they will primarily be eating pinhead crickets, which is for the typical person owning these things, it'd be really annoying to get because pinhead crickets are not readily available if you're just getting them from your big box stores like Petco and things like that. I think the size that they start at typically is quarter-inch.
Yeah.
You can always have Josh's Frogs send you pinhead crickets, but then you have to be accounting for weather and things like that, and sometimes it's difficult.
Yep.
I know. And so we kind of try to get them out of that phase very quickly. So we feed them pinheads for a couple of weeks, and then they bump up to 1/8 inch, which is a lot more manageable. And then once they are about 1.5, 2 months old, which is around when we like to start selling them, they're eating quarter-inch crickets when we're sending them to people. So if they are in a pinch, even though they might love Josh's Frogs crickets, because we all love Josh's Frogs crickets.
Yep.
If they have to in a pinch, they can go out and get crickets at the store.
Cool. Now, talk a little bit about breeding them. Like, how do you get them to breed? Are you moving them out of their enclosure to breed them? How are you doing that?
Yes. So with Hourglass, if you set them up in their permanent enclosures and just give them water, usually they'll kind of just do their own thing. They're like reed frogs, like in that way. But if you want to be more successful, moving them into a rain chamber is typically the way that we go.
Yeah.
And they like to lay on, the ones that we have like to lay on foliage. So we give them a lot of like pothos, and we have these fake fern plants that we like to utilize. And they just kind of like cover them all over the place. And just like the last time that we had a breeding event, they kind of just put them on everything. I think they put them on cork too.
Wow.
So, and it was kind of annoying because they would like wedge themselves down into the crevices of the cork, and you kind of have to like wash the tadpoles once they're hatched out, or else they will dry out and not be good.
Yeah.
The other species that we work with, they will primarily lay their eggs on foliage that is like slightly submerged or partially submerged. So the triangulum and the clowns proper, those guys will lay on pothos that's kind of like the end is dipping into the water. And then the bird poop frogs they kind of just like lay on a film on the top of the water. So we have 3 different species or like modes of breeding within the species that we have in this genus, which is really weird.
Yeah.
Because usually if you're looking at one genus, they're all going to breed the exact same way. But yeah, it's a really cool and a very diverse genus in that way. And just like the patterns and things, it's a very, very diverse one.
Cool. You talked a little bit about caging size, but we didn't talk about like how you're setting them up. Are you setting them up paper towel on the bottoms of their tank? Are you using substrate? How are you setting them up?
For ease of cleaning, the babies are on paper towel. We move them into, it's essentially like a 32-ounce deli cup when they first come out of the water. So they're really, really tiny. If we're putting them in a 10-gallon, even though we have paper towel on the bottom that's moist and wet, and we go through and change that multiple times, and if we have to go through and mist everything, there's body is not big enough to maintain humidity and like osmotic balance, essentially, where they can still run the risk of drying out if they get off the paper towel for too long. So we keep them in the 32-ounce cups for the first couple of weeks. It makes it easier for them to find their food as well, because there's a much smaller area that they can search for. So they end up growing a bit faster than they would if they were in a 10-gallon. And then once they're on 1/8-inch crickets, then they're pretty solid. We can move them into the 10 gallons. And then those are kind of like cookie cutter. They're all changed the exact same way, which is nice for my employees that are doing that.
Yeah.
But adults, we keep them basically like dart frogs with a little bit more ventilation.
Gotcha.
So you have your screen top. We partially cover that with some plastic or some plexiglass or glass, and you just have it cut perfectly to fit in 1/2 of the screen tops. With the newer Exoterra tanks that are specifically for like frog vivariums, they kind of do that work for you, and they only have like the back half of the tank screened. So those are really good if you're wanting to use those for most tree frogs, because you get the ventilation, but you don't lose as much humidity as you do with the classic Exoterra tanks.
Cool. Speaking of ventilation, temperature and humidity for these guys, what are you looking to aim for?
So for these guys, we typically try to do 72 to 78 degrees. If you get too hot, it can be dangerous. You run the risk of things drying out faster, because in the jungle, yes, it's probably going to be getting higher than 80 degrees at some point, but there's so much more humidity than we have, especially in like the summertime and wintertime in some of the northern states and the southern states in the summertime when you're running AC all the time. You're drying out your house, whether you notice it or not, for a good chunk of the year. So those are just some issues that we have to kind of try to combat when setting up our tanks and making sure that the sphagnum is remaining wet. They have a water dish that they can get into at any given time. With the paper towel, typically we're changing that frequently enough that we don't need to worry about the paper towel drying out, because we're adding enough water, and they're only going to be using that paper towel for like 2 days at most.
Cool. Are they hard to keep, and how would you compare their the level of expertise you would need to keep these as compared to other frogs? And then anything else you want to let us know about Hourglass frogs?
So with tree frogs and toads, I feel like most toads are pretty easy to keep. They're kind of like that entry level beginner toad or frog. And then white tree frogs are kind of on that same level. They're really hardy. You don't really need to worry about them as much as some of the other frogs that might have some more strict humidity and temperature requirements, or just weird behavioral things that make them a little bit more tricky to deal with. They are flighty because they're small. They're going to be, their instinct is, I am food, and if something is picking me up, I am going into its mouth. I know that people typically don't think that way when they're handling things, but that, like, the animal, if you are encountering it, is going into that encounter feeling like you are going to eat it. So handling is kept to a minimum. with things like whites, for whatever reason, when they hit adulthood, they just stop caring about their own safety and will just hang out with you.
Yeah.
And some other frogs kind of get that way where they're just like, I don't care anymore. But these guys, basically all the time, will try to get away, with the exception of the bird poop frogs. They're a little bit less flighty. They'll kind of, like, if you pick them up, they'll kind of just like morph to your hand. And I don't know if that's a behavior because they're extremely cryptic and things don't typically predate on them as much because they look so gross and they're trying their hardest to be unappetizing. Because I can't think of really anything that his main diet is bird poop other than bacteria and fungus. So they're kind of the exception to the rule. They're a little bit more chill. You can pick them up and they'll just kind of like sit on your finger and be pretty chill. But yeah, babies for sure are one of those ones that like they will try to get away no matter what. So if you have to move them around, that's something to consider. They're going to try to get away from you. Try to anticipate when they're jumping and put them in a container if you're having to clean their tank.
Cool. Bird poop frogs. Just a little trivia. They are one of my favorite frogs. Like even more so than I think the dart frogs are. At this point in my life, like I just think that it's so cool that they are mimicking bird poop. Like that's just so cool that's their defense mechanism. So, all right. Thank you, Austin, for dropping some wisdom on the Hourglass frogs and educating us. We're going to do a lightning round with you again. We'll see how many of these things have actually changed over the episodes. So, all right. If money and space were no issue, what's the pet you're going to get?
It's still a yellow spotted clapping toad female. Yep. I got it. They're so fun. And we actually have them again. And I'm at a point where I could potentially set up something really, really cool in my house for just one toad, and she would be spoiled rotten.
All right, so we need to get you that toad in your house, and then the next podcast you can talk about another animal. All right, besides Josh's frogs, besides Auto Top Off, and besides RAL, what is another brand in our hobby that's producing a cool product, or another breeder that's doing some really cool animals?
Oh boy. You know what? I'll shout out Wikiri.
Oh, cool.
Yep. And I think in conjunction with them, Indoor Ecosystems is who they're working with stateside. So Wikiri is the commercial arm of a facility down in Ecuador, right? I don't want to say the wrong country. I think they're in Ecuador. And the research arm is funded by Wikiri and the sales that they make. And so they are working with a very, very cool genus, primarily the Atelopus, which are, I think, the most endangered genus of amphibians. If I'm making this up,
it
very
sounds
possible.
Reasonable.
Yeah, like if you go onto IUCN or AmphibiaWeb and you scroll down when you filter that genus, everything is like endangered, critically endangered, or extinct.
Yeah.
There are a couple species that are in, I think, like northeastern South America that for some reason are not as affected by the chytrid fungus, but they are just like a very, very endangered group of frogs, specifically toads. Harlequin toads is the other common name, or the stubfoot toad. So yeah, let's go with Wikiri on that one.
Cool. All right, remind us, what's your first pet that you ever had?
My first pet, exotic or any? It was a dog. We had dogs growing up. I think she was technically a dog-coyote hybrid, though.
All right, that's a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, so like halfway into that exotic realm.
That's awesome.
At least that's what my dad said. I'm not sure if that's 100% true.
Yeah, I don't know if all dogs are part coyote, part wolf. Maybe that's
right.
Yeah. Where did they split? Mm-hmm. All right. Favorite animal or plant?
Favorite animal would be the Brachycephalus patinga, which is a pumpkin toadlet down in Brazil. They are just very, very cool. and got a lot of stuff going on. They're like, I think I talked about it in the first podcast I did. They don't have like fully developed hands because they're so small. They're like a centimeter long, and they're direct developers. They have tetrodotoxin and they fluorescent or blacklight.
Cool animals. Cool animals.
Yep.
All right, you got a free hour of time, but there's no electricity, so you can't play video games.
Oh no!
So you have a free hour, no electricity. What are you doing with your hour?
I'd probably suggest going on, if it's warm outside, probably go on a walk with my family.
Oh, cool.
There's a cool Riverwalk trail that goes past the train museum and down the river in town. So
cool.
We usually do that on nice summer days when it's not too hot and not freezing cold.
Yeah, cool. All right, and the last thing, the hardest question. If you had a bunch of people listening to you, they gave you your ear, they're all being quiet and they're staring at you, what's the one piece of advice or one reminder that you would give people when they're all listening to you?
I think I said be nice to people and then test your animals.
Yeah.
In that order. Got to come up with something different. Be more environmentally conscious. How about that? This could be as something as small as like, I walked through the woods in this place and I'm going to clean off my shoes so that I'm not potentially moving pathogens around, or being a little bit more, if you're out exploring, putting animals back and not bringing them into your house type of thing. Yep.
It's kind of eye-opening when you start looking at the small changes, but it apply to a big group of people is a big change. So cool. Austin, thank you for educating us on Hourglass Frogs. Austin is a common guest on podcasts, on the videos that we do, does a bunch of writing for us, so you'll see his stuff everywhere, and does some shows every now and then, so you'll see him on the road, that kind of stuff. So make sure you stop and say hi to him, and thanks for all you do for us, Austin.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoy this content and want to stay up to date, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us across social media. We always want to bring you the best content, so let us know what you think in the comments. And for all your reptile and amphibian needs, be sure to check us out at joshsfrogs.com. We have an amazing selection. Until next time, stay curious, stay froggy, and keep exploring.